So, hallo, guten Morgen. Es ist mir eine große Freude, hier zu sein. Schöne Konferenz, nette Leute, tolle Organisatoren, yes. Sonnenschein, oh, es ist weg. Und Freiburg, wunderbar. Vielen Dank für die Einladung. Einige meiner Gedanken und unserer Arbeit noch einmal mit Ihnen zu teilen. It's very difficult for me, but thank you, is what I want to say. Please, given that you all have to understand my English, you please don't clap me, but I do feel as if I'm amongst friends, and so I hope you'll just allow me 1 second to say hello, a special hello to a good friend, a very long time colleague, my advisor, my mentor, Dr. Skadi Springer. So I just want to send a kiss to Skadi. Thank you. Thank you. So, and I'm looking at the time. Okay, so the nutrition of human milk donors, does it matter? This is some of the stuff that Corinna said. So, conflicts of interest, I have none to declare, but in the spirit of international cooperation, Christoph, I think I should say that I was breastfed, my mother says, for 3 months, so 12 weeks, she says. But what I do know is that I breastfed my son for 2 years and my daughter for 3 years. And my daughter has now breastfed for many years her children and my son's child also. But also I donated milk with both of my children. So I am very, very invested. This has not just been my work. I'm very invested in this whole topic. I want to just very quickly point out a few things. I always have this very long definition of human milk banking. But the reason I do this is because I think it captures all of the important aspects of the work that we do. But I want to highlight some things here because these are relevant to the talk that I'm going to give. So the screening of donors is relevant when we're thinking about their nutrition. The quality control of the milk. We're reliant on the donors to give us good quality milk. And it's our responsibility to ensure that we optimize that quality. We need to meet the specific needs of infants and young children. That's very, very important. And equally important is we always need to protect, promote, and support breastfeeding in everything that we do. And if we think about our global mission, again, promoting and supporting breastfeeding by providing safe, high quality donor milk. But I think it's worth remembering that for very, very many babies, donor human milk is a bridge to breastfeeding. It's required for a short space of time. That's how it should be until the mother is able to provide enough of her own breast milk. But for some, it may be an infant's only opportunity to receive human milk. And that is why the quality of it, and particularly the nutritional quality, but the overall quality is so important. And then if we think about what donor human milk is, well, it's expressed by a lactating mother. It's processed, so that's going to impact the nutrition as anyway. Payment for the donated milk is not provided other than as a reimbursement of expenses. So the word donor means that it's freely given. So if we're talking about donor human milk, we should always be talking about milk that has been freely given. If payment is given, it alters the whole relationship. So when we're thinking about the nutrition of the human milk donor, we need to consider the donors. We need to think about the donor's own baby. And we need to think, of course, of the recipients of the donor human milk. And that's Felix there holding the photograph of himself when he was a very preterm infant on the neonatal unit where I used to work. So I'm going to start talking about the donors themselves. what is the nutritional impact on the donor of providing her surplus breast milk? Well, if we think who the donors are, so in some cases, the donors are all mothers who are in hospital, often on kangaroo mother care wards with their baby, and they're expressing to establish their own milk supply to support their own baby. And then every day the surplus goes to the milk bank. Now, that's the situation in many countries around the world. I'm thinking particularly of countries in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, in South America, Brazil. Every day, the surplus milk goes to the milk bank, and that is donated for other babies. So that mother needs to express all that milk in order to establish and to maintain her lactation, so that when her baby is bigger, more mature, is able to fully feed at the breast, she will have plenty of milk at that point. So some have been in hospital, or their baby is in hospital, and they're expressing again to support their own baby. The surplus milk that is stored whilst their baby is in the NICU, on the neonatal unit, when the baby goes home, can often be donated if it meets our requirements and if it's something that they want to do. Often if they don't have freezer space at home to take the milk home, then they will donate it to the milk bank. And again, this is part of the process of being able to breastfeed a baby when they go home, to be able to maintain their own lactation. We also have mothers who start expressing for their own baby whilst they're at home. Very often, certainly in the UK, mothers start expressing very early, I think far too early, but out of a lack of confidence that they may have enough milk. So they want to have a stock of milk. They want to make sure they've got enough. They don't believe that their baby will grow. They can't see the milk, so they want to express it and put it in the freezer. And of course, some mums express because they don't want to physically breastfeed. They want to breast milk feed. They want to. And if mothers start expressing very early on, then it's quite likely that they will build a supply that is more than their own baby needs. It can build up, and it can mean that very quickly they can't get by without expressing, and they build up a big stock of milk. And then there are those at home who decide to become a milk donor and start to express milk at that point. Often we get a combination of some of these. It varies between milk banks, it varies around the world. So those are the donors. I want to think specifically now about the donors to the Hearts Milk Bank. I co-founded a milk bank. It's an independent milk bank in the UK. It's not for profit. We provide donor milk to over 50 hospitals and also milk to babies in the community where the mothers are unable to breastfeed or to provide their breast milk because of their own clinical situation. So I just put together some figures from 2022 and 2023 so far this year, sorry. Just looking at the volume of the mother's donation. So less than 10 litres of milk is by far and away the most common volume of milk that is donated. But if we go down the list, you will see that we have actually mothers who donate, 30 to 40 litres, 15 of them in 2022, right up to more than 100 litres, and there were 3 of those. So far this year, we haven't had any donors giving more than 100 litres, but still donors giving very large amounts of milk. Now, if we just look at it in a graph with the volume donated on the x-axis, then you can see that there's very few mothers who give a lot of milk, but actually when you look at the total volumes, so if we think of, say, the milk from those who gave more than 50 litres, that's 18 donors who've given probably, 300, 500, over 1,000 litres of milk. So very few women giving a very large amount of milk. So actually, the nutritional quality of that milk, but also the nutritional status of those women is very important. Just comparing, this is just to show that it hasn't changed very much. By and large, the numbers providing the different volumes are very similar. But as I said, we have to think about those few donors that provided lots of milk. So sometimes very large volumes of milk are donated, or mothers donate for a long period of time. And this is going to have implications for their own dietary requirements. Now, we know that when a woman is lactating, when she's breastfeeding, that it increases her calorie requirements, her energy requirements, but of course it also increases her daily dietary requirements of all of the nutrition that's going into the milk, as well as meeting the energy requirements of actually producing the milk. It also has implications for the body stores of nutrients of that donor, especially the fat-soluble nutrients that are stored in the body. So if that lactating woman isn't able to meet her dietary requirements from her food, then they will be taken from her body stores. There's kind of like a recipe for breast milk in the breasts. The milk is made up. It obviously alters, but the actual production of the milk is kind of made to a recipe. And if there isn't enough, I don't know, circulating whatever nutrient you want to think about, vitamin B6, whatever, that's circulating, then if the stores there, it will be taken from the stores, and it's the mother's stores that will diminish, not the level of the nutrients in the milk. The mother has to be very, very seriously malnourished for that to happen. So some micronutrients, however, do diminish through lactation because of those diminishing body stores. The classic example of this is zinc. Very important, essential nutrient for development. You all know this, particularly for the development of the immune system, but for everything in the body, zinc it's ubiquitous, is its need. Most of the zinc is accumulated during the 3rd trimester, so preterms require up to 4 times as much zinc as term infants, which is why they are mainly supplemented. But we do know that zinc throughout the process of lactation, the period of lactation, diminishes. So we have to think about what's the impact of that on the nutritional status of the mother. If she's been pregnant for however long, she's lactated, she's increased her lactation in order to donate milk, she's maybe done that for 3 months, 6 months, a year, and then a subsequent pregnancy may start off with very diminished bodily stores of some essential nutrients. So it's one of the things that I just want to raise and that I think we need to think about. If anybody is worried about their zinc status and you think you can eat these, then oysters are by far and away the best source of zinc. But zinc is quite a common nutrient in the diet. But having said that, it's also quite easy to be deficient in zinc. So, and I just want to mention that, it should never be a competition. Some mothers get into competition with themselves and they get into competition with others, and they want to be able to provide the most milk ever. There's always a world record for milk donation. It keeps changing. This is from the 17th of August. This lovely lady is called Elizabeth Anderson Sierra. She's the current Guinness World Record holder. She's got the record for donating 422 gallons, so that's 1,600 litres of milk. However, she maintains that because that was all that she donated to the milk bank, she donated much more to friends and people, local people, presumably. I don't know exactly who she donated it to, but she says 2,300 gallons. So that's a phenomenal amount of milk. If you think 1,600 litres, if it was just that, if you go into a supermarket and you had 1,600 litres of cow's milk, that's a phenomenal amount. So she produces so much milk that she pumps for 5 hours a day. When she was 20 weeks pregnant, she was producing 900 mils a day. Now, all this is because she has a rare medical condition. It's called hyperlactation syndrome. But I wouldn't be surprised if most of you, if you've worked in milk banking for long enough, you will have a donor with hyperlactation syndrome, somebody who just has so much milk and they clearly want to donate it because it's a very, wonderful thing to be able to do. But actually, what's maybe a more useful thing to do is to help and to support them to reduce their lactation. And I know it's something that we've worked with donors at the Hearts Milk Bank, and indeed our lactation support, our IBCLCs who work in the milk bank, have worked very hard with mothers to enable them to be able to reduce their lactation supplies. So much so that they can actually have a life and they can leave the house and their babies can breastfeed, because with so much milk, often the babies can't physically breastfeed. So partly because of my interest in nutrition, for many, many years, I've audited a lot of things to do with nutrition on our questionnaires, on our recruitment questionnaires. And so we do always ask about any dietary intolerances, about supplementation, and so on. You can see some of the figures here. So last year in 2022, we recruited 35 vegetarians. I think there were about 400 and some donors here, 11 vegans, but most 308 had no restrictions whatsoever. Their reason for donating, 14, we call our bereaved donors snowdrop donors, and that was their choice. We asked them. It's because in England, the snowdrop is called the milk flower. It looks like it's drops of milk, and we grow snowdrops, and we have the snowdrop is the emblem of our milk bank. But the vast majority, 388, were donating because it was surplus. 7, and in fact this sometimes is really quite high, were donating because they had an intolerance, usually a cow's milk intolerance, or it's been suggested that they have a cow's milk intolerance, and they go on an exclusion diet, and whilst they're excluding dairy from their own diet, they express and donate the milk. So I don't know if that has a relevance to the babies that we're feeding, but you can see there that the sort of restrictions that are present. Now, bearing in mind all of this, I don't know about you, but it's not very often I have conversations with donors about this, about their nutrition, about their nutrient intake, about the potential, if they're wanting to donate long term, that maybe they should be taking supplements and so on. Are they asking them these questions? But I'm raising that question. I think this is something we should be thinking about. What should we be telling mothers? And what are our responsibilities? We have responsibilities here. We are facilitating and encouraging mothers to do this. Should we think about limiting donation times? We want the milk. We're nothing if we don't have if donors don't give us milk. But should we be thinking about this? And the role of lactation support, as I said, hyperlactation is rare, but most milk banks will be contacted by someone sooner or later. And I think this raises real training and competency issues for milk banks, and the need for experienced lactation support for milk donors in every milk bank. And I think it's worth saying that one of the things that sets the for-profit companies aside is that they don't have lactation support. They don't consider that by and large as helpful. And there are ethical implications here in the recruitment. These are, the donor milk is a substance of human origin, as Daniel was talking about. So there are ethical implications, and the new EU regulations that he was talking about will bring these ethical considerations to the forefront, because when milk banks are regulated alongside blood, cells, tissue, and so on, the ethical considerations are very important in all substances of human origin. What about the donor's own baby? Is their nutrition impacted by the mother's decision to donate her milk? Do we sometimes accept milk that could otherwise extend the length of time that baby would receive human milk? We do, of course, because often we're accepting milk that the mother's own baby could have, but she has no storage room at home, she doesn't have freezer space at home, I think it's going to be an interesting time going forward, because the ability to freeze dry milk is becoming more widely available. A new company has set up in the UK, and mothers will be able to get their surplus milk freeze-dried and then store it at home for their baby to be able to use in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, a year's time, longer. It will have an impact on milk banks. And part of me thinks that milk should be for that mother's own baby. But equally, you know, it's also everybody's right to be able to donate and to be able to share and to be able to help. But I think that we need to think about this, that these are challenges that we might have. On the other hand, of course, having milk banks in itself has a very positive impact on attitudes to breastfeeding and on attitudes to breast milk itself. We are underlining, we are highlighting the importance of human milk by everything that we do. Just by existing, we are saying human milk, breast milk, is very important. So I'm going to move on to the recipients. So who are the recipients? Well, you know them well. If you work clinically, you're working with the recipients of donor milk. But they do fall into different categories. If it's a preterm infant, in an ideal situation, assuming that the mother is getting optimal lactation support, assuming that she's not even more stressed and anxious than you would expect her to be anyway, then it should take 3 to 5 days for that mother to be able to collect enough milk to be able to meet her baby's requirements. Her baby's requirements will not be very high because the baby's born preterm, so doesn't need a lot of milk at that stage. So within 3 to 5 days, we should be able to see that mothers are taking over and being able to provide all of their own milk for their own babies. But there are always situations where that doesn't happen. Sometimes we just don't know why. Women struggle to establish their lactation, to be able to optimize it, to get a full milk supply for all sorts of reasons. Just the very fact of expressing milk for some is enough to stop the milk from flowing. So for some, those babies may need donor milk for 2 to 4 weeks, possibly more. We also see babies with severe gut abnormalities or intolerances, post-surgery, all sorts of things where they may need donor milk, human milk, for years, months, sometimes years. I've supported a family whose baby required donor milk for 2 years. The family were told that this child had nil chance of survival. She actually was taken home for palliative care and expected to die, you know, within a week or so, and amazingly survived and is now actually a mother herself. So the importance of the nutritional quality of the donor milk depends on these factors. It's going to be much more important for those babies that are solely fed with donor milk or are receiving most of their enteral nutrition from donor milk for a long period of time. Now, of course, as Christoph has very eloquently described, you know, the milk can be fortified. So if we can add particularly macronutrients to that milk to ensure that it's sufficient for babies. But we need to get scientific about it. And if we're thinking about feeding babies long term, then obviously the nutritional quality of that milk is important. Now, just a little bit of chemistry here of what human milk consists of. It's mostly water. Almost 90% of it is water. Protein is very low. There's very little protein in human milk. Fats are about 4%, and then carbohydrates are 7%, but up to about a third of that are the complex sugars, the human milk oligosaccharides. But very importantly, human milk is full of all the minerals that are needed for survival, for growth, for development, for optimization of every process in the body, as are the vitamins, the water-soluble vitamins and the fat-soluble vitamins. So thinking about the protein and thinking about maternal diet, there are over 1,000 different proteins in breast milk. They're not all nutritional proteins, but there are over 1,000, and they're each made up of amino acids. So these are the building blocks of proteins. Now, depending on your diet, if you eat everything, if you eat meat, you eat fish, you eat dairy, then all of those products have a complete set of amino acids in them. So all the amino acids that your body needs, or the mother's body needs, to be able to produce the breast milk are there in those foods. If you exclude meat, fish, dairy, then you need to eat a mixture of plant-based foods which together will provide all the amino acids, because in plant-based foods you get some amino acids and some are missing. In another type of plant food, there will be other amino acids. If you eat them together, then the protein, the complete protein, is equal to an animal product. So we always used to think in the UK, beans on toast is a very common food for, and you're smiling, so I guess you know beans on toast. So the amino acids in the beans complement the amino acids in the cereal, in the bread, and together you get a complete protein. So you never have to feel bad about feeding your children beans on toast. It's very nutritious. But it's also possible to, by not balancing a plant-based diet, to exclude some of the amino acids. So that's just an important bit of my nutrition background from way back. Okay, so fats are very important, lipids are very important in breast milk. Breast milk includes the essential fatty acids, the omega-3 fatty acids, because these are needed to build the nervous system, to aid healthy brain and eye development. So incredibly important, and not present in other infant foods. So lactose is the main carbohydrate, and of course the HMOs are there as complex sugars. Mention the minerals and the vitamins. It's also worth mentioning that you get contaminants. There are contaminants in our diet, and so you get contaminants in human milk. Anything that goes in, anything that's eaten or drunk will get into, by and large, get into the body and into the milk. And there's lots and lots of contaminants that we're exposed to, not just from our food, every day. So we need to think about those too. The macronutrients are largely unaffected by diet. So the amounts in breast milk are largely unaffected. If you eat more protein, you won't get more protein in the breast milk. If you eat more fats, some things do affect the nutritional content of the milk, but it's more to do with things like the mother's body mass index, the time of day, how old her baby is, the gestational age, how milk is processed, and so on. The fats are a bit different, because although the amount of fat doesn't really alter, the types of fats and those essential fatty acids will only be there if the essential fatty acids are in the diet or are eaten as supplements. So in any sort of fish-free diet, so vegan, vegetarian, or particularly an omnivorous diet where oily fish are never eaten, without supplementation, that breast milk will be lower in the essential fatty acids, and that's something that we need to think about. Should we, for example, use milk from somebody on a very restricted diet only when we know that milk is being used for a very short period of time, or is being provided to a baby but they are getting largely fed with their own mother's milk, or they're being supplemented appropriately? Okay. In terms of contaminants, should we be advising donors to eat foods that are lower in contaminants? Should we be recommending organic foods? Would we dare to do that with the cost, the increased cost? What about plastics, avoiding aluminium, avoiding too much oily fish? Oily fish are a very important source of the essential fatty acids, but too much oily fish and you're getting too much mercury, all the other heavy metals. So do we have a responsibility? Should we be telling all breastfeeding women this? It's usually part of advice, but not necessarily. We worry about putting women off breastfeeding. If we become too prescriptive about our diet, are we giving a very negative message that some families would interpret, well, what's the point of breastfeeding if I can't eat a healthy diet, maybe I shouldn't breastfeed? So that's a responsibility. I think when we're thinking about contaminants, we need to get a balanced view, and we need to consider the alternatives. If the babies aren't fed with breast milk, what contamination is in the alternatives? And what about exclusion diets? There's all sorts of exclusion diets. This is an exclusion diet here, but it's a very well-balanced diet. But to eat all those foods daily is quite a task. You know, there's lots of shopping you've got to do. There's lots of chewing, for sure. Gorgeous foods, I could happily eat that all day long, but it's not an easy diet, you know, so if you're recommending that. Are you familiar with Marmite? Do you know Marmite? It's a yeast extract. It's actually something that you put on bread or toast. It's made from yeast. It's full of B vitamins, and so actually it's a very useful food, very easy food to increase B vitamins, but it's something that people love or hate. I think most people hate it, but those that love it do. Okay, so Corinna mentioned the European Milk Bank Association. I hope you're all familiar with it, that you know that there's a website, europeanmilkbanking.com. One of the things, so two important things I need to say. Firstly is that we have an international congress every other year, and this year is the year. So it's in Madrid, it's next month, it's at the end of October. I'm hoping to see, at least, I know I shall see some of you, but more of you there. It's a very useful conference for really networking, because although it's European, we get delegates from all around the world, and a lot more are coming this year, I know, from around the world. I'm getting messages all the time coming to Madrid. It's a very good conference, and I think I can say that. I'm biased, but we can certainly say that. But the other great thing that I think very useful thing that EMBA does is it has working groups that take specific topics and get anybody interested in that topic together and work over a year, a couple of years, to really come out with, to study the subject and to come out hopefully with recommendations. So at the moment there are working groups on the microbiology of the milk banking process, on the processing of milk, on the uses of donor human milk, which babies receive it, on fundraising, that's a very small group, and on one on maternal diet and donor human milk, funnily enough. And as a result of the work that our group has been doing, I'm honoured to chair that group. A paper was accepted on the 5th of September. It's imminent, and it's looking at vegan and vegetarian diets and human milk donation. It's the result of an EMBA survey. You may well have been surveyed. If you've filled out the questionnaire and you sent your information, then thank you very much. You'll be pleased to know it's about to be shared. The main author is Dr. Serena Gandino here. Serena is Italian, but she's actually working in Oxford as a doctor at the moment. So she's just down the road from where I work, and she's put in an enormous amount of work, but then as have many others here, particularly those who were involved at the very beginning with the survey. So the survey was across all of the milk banks in Europe to explore practices around vegan and vegetarian donors. And what I can tell you straight away is that there's lots of differences, as you might expect. 27% of all those who responded always exclude vegans. No question, no argument, no debate, no discussion. If you're vegan, you can't donate. Okay, I don't know if that applies to anybody here. 28% will accept vegans if they take vitamin B12 supplementation. But what was very clear from the survey was that nobody knew how much supplementation, what level of supplementation is required. 47% always include vegans, no questions asked, you know, that's fine, lovely. Okay, so that's interesting in itself, but also a bit worrying, because I worry about the message to vegans saying you can't donate milk, because that's saying your milk isn't safe, we don't want your milk, which has has implications for them feeding their own baby. Now, I would be much happier with saying, you know, we will only accept you if you're taking supplements, if you show us that you're taking supplements. And I think any time that we refuse to donate someone for whatever reason, whether it's a medication, whatever it is, whether the milk's too old, we need to make sure that we get the message across that that milk is safe, or if not, what they need to do for their own baby. That we don't just say, well, thank you, but no thank you, you know, go on your way. There are lots of different guidelines. The guidelines, the recommendations within these differ, unsurprisingly. So it's not surprising that there's different practices around donor recruitment. But if we think about the important points that came out of this study and that are in the paper, the first is that the nutritional adequacy of donor human milk, from not just from vegan but from vegetarian mothers, continues to be debated. And there are a variety of recommendations around eligibility to donate. Just looking at these, the NICE guideline, which is the UK guideline, it says that provide ongoing support to all donors according to their individual needs until no longer required. And it specifically says this may include information and ongoing support on milk bank requirements for their diet and alcohol consumption. Well, that's about as useful you know, as saying nothing, really, isn't it? Because it doesn't say what you should be. When I have a recommendation, I like to see what I'm supposed to be recommending. Anyway, the EMBA recommendations, I have to say, are more helpful. It says exclude prospective donors if they follow a vegan diet without supplementation with vitamin B12. Doesn't go any further, doesn't give any sort of levels. So thinking about the other points that are in the paper, the latest evidence states that human milk from vegans and vegetarians is similar to that from omnivores. So actually, you can have very healthy vegan vegetarian diet, and that the milk will be very little different. However, there will be differences in vitamin B12 and omega-3 fatty acid concentrations. So the survey explored the practices in milk banks throughout the whole of Europe. 188 milk banks were contacted. They were all the ones where the contact details were available, and 118 replied, so 63%. So again, if you were one of those, thank you very much. The recommendations that came out of the survey was that B12 should be supplemented by 27%. So 27% of the milk banks that replied said that B12 supplementation should happen for vegans. 26% said for vegetarians, which is interesting because B12 is really only an issue for vegans. And the rest were either routinely excluded or the question was just not asked. So the conclusions are that vegan and vegetarian diets, if they're well managed and supplemented, are nutritionally appropriate, and it says even during breastfeeding. And I did send a message saying please change the even to including during breastfeeding, because even during breastfeeding makes it sound like, you know, something extreme that you're doing here. You know, oh my goodness, you're breastfeeding. But maybe that's just my English interpretation of it. The other conclusion was that evidence-based recommendations are needed, but also something that I think we can all take on board is that milk banks can provide important nutritional counselling to breastfeeding mothers. We have that ability, and it's important for ourselves to make sure that we're able to do that. And I think a well-balanced vegan diet is healthier than actually a limited omnivorous diet. We all know, we've maybe been there in the past, maybe even now, where, you know, life gets in the way and you rely on foods that you know are not the best. But yeah, the working group is continuing. The aspects of diet that we're looking at next are alcohol, caffeine. We're going to be looking at supplements and food contaminants. I just discovered at my ripe old age, I won't tell you what it is, espresso martinis, which are amazing. So the alcohol and caffeine is obviously going to be covered in that, and supplementation there. Okay, so should milk banks, seriously now, should they exclude donors whose diet is suboptimal? But who would it be? And how really can we find out without spending a long time, without putting donors through a very extensive recruitment process? What would the criteria be? Should we be providing supplements to donors? Should we be recommending them? Should we be providing them? A researcher in the UK contacted me wanting to do a study, which we may or may not do, but where supplements are provided to donors and then obviously looking at the milk, but also wanted to provide vouchers for oily fish. So here's your piece of paper that you can take to the supermarket or the fishmonger and get your salmon or your whatever, your mackerel. Or alternative omega-3 supplements, because although oily fish, it is possible to get omega-3 supplements that are vegan, derived from algae. So should we be analysing the milk? Should we not just be looking at macronutrients? Should we be looking at some of the micronutrients? Should we be looking at zinc levels, for example, in the milk? Should we only issue donor milk that meets minimum standards, or do we recognise that, you know, donor milk has these different uses, and maybe we could target infants with the most appropriate milk? The only way you can do that is if you have a big enough service in order to do it, because the smaller your service, the more limited, the fewer donors you will have in every category to be able to always do something. And what would be the effect on any of these donors? Could they stop donating because of the information? Could they decide not to do it in the first place? Would some stop breastfeeding? Globally, the picture around the world, this is relevant to everybody, but I think it's more or less relevant to some. There are 160 plus milk banks around the world. If you've never seen this map before, the link here will take you to it, but also there's a whole toolkit that this is part of. So WHO recommends, of course, donor human milk for preterm and low birth weight infants, and they're coming out very strongly in terms of this, as well as sick newborns. And the recommendations, the guidelines that were published last November, I think it was, state this very clearly. There haven't been, and there still are no global guidelines. We have EMBA guidelines, we have national guidelines. However, they are in development and they will be published. The work is ongoing at the moment and they will be published next year. I'm not going to say really very much about this, except to consider that in addition to all the work that is done in the non-profit sector, there are these increasing numbers and increasingly huge companies that are also recruiting mothers. They're usually paying for the milk, which in itself has ethical and other implications. It certainly has implications for the rest of them, for the non-profit, because if women are selling their milk, there isn't milk left to give to us. So it's certainly very relevant. So does the nutrition of milk donors matter? That was the question I was asked. My summary is that there are ethical considerations as well as nutrition-related considerations when recruiting donors. Donating may well impact the nutritional status and therefore potentially the physical, mental health and well-being of donors, positively or negatively. We need to think about this. It has the potential to affect the health of the donor's babies. Oops. And there are aspects of the nutrition of donors that can certainly impact the nutrition and health of the recipient infants. So just going back to this, that we need evidence-based recommendations and we need to recognise that we have an important role in the provision of nutritional counselling to breastfeeding mothers. So, danke. These are, sorry. These are a few of the families that we work with. The Hearts Milk Bank is part of the Human Milk Foundation. Please go to our website and take a look. We've got lots of films, lots of interviews with donors, with families, recipients. We supply donor milk to very many families in the community, and there's lots of testaments from them. But we also have free online training modules that are there. You're very welcome to do them. Send us our comments, send us your comments, and lots of things on the website. So thank you very much again. Oh, questions. Forgot questions.
Thank you, Gillian, for having insight into your fantastic work. and you gave us some really important aspects to think about in the future.
Food for thought.
Yes. So we can have 2 or 3 questions. If you want to speak German, I will try to translate. This will be in English.
So I just wanted to quickly share and maybe get your thoughts on the VECI study that was done here in Germany. They studied children on the 3 diets, so to speak. And they actually found that vegetarian children had the highest risk of B12 mangel. Deficiency, thank you, because it's so commonly talked about and known for vegans to supplement with B12, but for vegetarians, if they're not drinking significant amounts of milk, if they're not eating cake with eggs all the time or eggs for breakfast, that they are actually not getting their B12. So I found it interesting that you mentioned it, and I'd be curious about your thoughts.
Thank you. Yes. I think my main thought is that whatever diet we're eating, we need to think about the components of it. And you're right, it's very easy to be vegetarian, not going the whole way. Nearly said the whole hog, but that would be inappropriate for a vegan, wouldn't it? Not going the whole way and excluding all animal products, but being vegetarian. But it's quite easy to eat a vegetarian diet that isn't healthy. I think also, especially with children, if it's a vegetarian family, children, as we know, can be quite resistant to the color green when it's their food for some reason. And also children are very influenced and won't eat things that their friends aren't eating and so on. So it's not surprising that was the case. And you're right. Anyone who's vegan, or most people who are vegan, know that their diet is very limited, and so they know that they need to make healthy choices, they need to make good choices, and they need to take supplements. And I think the same knowledge about a vegetarian diet, which may be bordering on vegan, but largely because of maybe less healthy choices. Yes, so I'm not surprised, and that probably explains why certainly in parts of Europe there's this emphasis on considering vegetarians the same as vegans. Yeah, thank you, Heather.
Gibt es weitere Fragen? Aus dem Chat vielleicht? No.
It's time to eat.
Maybe nutrition aspects should be included more in prenatal care management. What do you think about this?
I remember from many years ago, so the Baby Friendly Initiative, I remember first coming across the Baby Friendly Initiative, however 20 odd years ago in the UK, and being very struck by their stance, certainly in the UK, that we shouldn't be telling breastfeeding mothers that they need to eat a healthy diet. And the reason was because, as I alluded to earlier, that they felt that this would put families off breastfeeding, that they would think, oh, my diet's not so healthy for whatever reason, or I can't afford organic foods, or I can't afford these foods, and so my baby will be better off if they're not breastfed. And of course, as I was saying, the impact is on the mother's own health and her dietary status. The baby won't suffer. And I kind of had problems with that, because although I accept that fully, that I still think that in order for anybody to be able to make informed decisions, they need to be informed. And it's not difficult to take a supplement if you're worried about your diet. And low-income families, certainly in the UK, supplements and so on are available for children and for pregnant women and for breastfeeding mothers. So it's a difficult one. I would like everybody to have the information and to be able to put much more emphasis on nutrition in schools, and not talking about nutrition, calling it, I don't know, happy eating or enjoying your food, whatever it is. But we need to learn at some point the importance of our diet and the impact it has on us. Yeah.
Thank you, Gillian, again.